Welcome to the World United. Welcome to the World United.
So for our final speaker, I am thrilled that Dr. Bruce Jackson has joined us, and he is a multifaceted individual. He works in optimizing leader, team, and organizational development. And I actually met him, well, through some mutual friends, but then our first time together, we went up to Harvard. I was in New York, he picked me up, and we went up to Harvard, where he was lecturing to, I believe, the Iraqi American Leadership Council there. And we've been close ever since. It's been exciting to watch his work develop and grow. Bruce H. Jackson, MBA, MPA, and PhD. Dr. Bruce H. Jackson has dedicated his career to the development of individuals, teams, organizations, and communities that seek to maximize influence, leadership, and change. Bruce is the founder of the Attentional Leadership Institute, a strategy, training, assessment, and coaching firm dedicated to helping individuals, teams, and organizations achieve peak performance. He wrote Finding Your Flow, How to Identify Your Flow Assets and Liabilities, the keys to peak performance every day to increase awareness, clarify driving principles, and engage in strategic and focused change. We are thrilled to have him with us today, and Bruce will be speaking to us about emerging leaders and the 5 alignments of attentional leadership. So, ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Jackson.
All right. Well, it is great. I love listening to everybody. It's just, I really appreciate everybody's journey to this place, and, you know, the contributions, the unique contributions that you're continually making. It's amazing to be speaking with people who are as purpose-driven as you all. So it's a great honor to be here. And Sean, I love your work and appreciate you. And we've had many adventures together, many adventures in the future. So I know our time is short. I'm going to take you through what I would call like my 25 years of research from academia through the professional into the philanthropic, and plant a few seeds, and then would be happy to engage with folks again going forward. But I'm going to share a quick slide deck. I thought about so many different ways and angles to talk about this area. And what I'm going to do is kind of start from the start. I do come from a bit of an eclectic perspective. As an undergraduate, studying psychology, as an athlete, aspiring to be a professional tennis player. I really wanted ultimately to be an Olympic psychologist. I wanted to know what was the psychology of peak performance. And I started that, and then graduate school, trained to become a psychologist. And then after completing that, moved into the MBA side of the world to see how we apply these ideas to business and any other life arena. And then did my PhD and studied, for some of you who understand the concept of flow or being in the zone, you might have heard of the word of Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who just passed away 4 weeks ago. He was my dissertation advisor. And my goal was to map out the dimensions of flow in a practical way. And then my postdoc at the Kennedy School to look at the nature of public policy and how do we scale influence? How do we scale leadership? But I also want to bring in the spiritual side, as well as what are we going to do about the next generation? So a quick tour. I like to talk about leadership through the lens of attention. At the very core of leadership and influencing yourself in the world is where you're placing your attention, when you're placing your attention, and how long you sustain your attention on an overall system that you're part of. So I'll do a quick review of that. In my study of high performers, whether that's astronauts, elite athletes, fire and police, business leaders, students, children, the elderly, I think most of us we recognize high performance when we see it. It's like a cloud of butterflies. It's multivariate. You see it constantly moving. But my goal was, whether you're looking at training leaders or high performers, is how do we make sense of this idea of high performance and leadership? And then where does spirituality and the developmental spectrum fit into this? In my work, half of my life is in the professional sphere. I do a lot of work all over the world, whether it's with scientists, business leaders. Just trained Harvard Law School. I'm now working with our nuclear scientists, our space program, higher ed, you name it, we're in that space. To me, there's always a fundamental difference between what I call the technical side of your life versus the non-technical, the quantitative versus the qualitative. And most people recognize that they go and educate themselves to become technically better, whether they want to be an accountant, a doctor, an attorney, a stay-at-home parent, whatever that is. But most recognize that despite how smart you are and how much knowledge you have, that what you know is only as good as who you've become. And most of us know geniuses who are brilliant, who they are gets in the way of what they could contribute, whether that's neuroticism and addiction, some type of self-confidence issue, or they don't work well with people, or they can't work well in a teaming structure. And so I always like to bring parity between the technical side and the human factors and environmental factors that produce focus and flow. When I studied individuals, my goal was to look at what are the factors that make people great at what they do. And I found that there's really three big dimensions, and it becomes three-dimensional. And that is what's happening on the inside of self, what's happening over the spectrum of time, and what's happening on the outside of self. And through that, I found 5 subdimensions. I'm going to take you a quick tour of those. And then I want to really focus in on the spiritual and philosophical side of this. I found that there's, of course, if you read a lot of Covey or Jim Lair or other books, you'll see people often bringing the individual. They'll talk about the physical self, the emotional self, the psychological self, and then they'll jump up to the spiritual. And I really want to bridge the line between what we think and what is true with what I call the philosophical dimension. My premise is that when principles are governing your values, your thinking, your feeling, your feelings, your actions, then alignment happens and full engagement ensues. And I've heard all of you kind of talk about, in a broad theme, how do I help individuals find their individualistic performance capacity? What unique contributions to the world are they here to bring? And we know that we all have a unique genetic code, iris, fingerprint, thumbprint, cultural history, personal history, family history. There's nobody in the world like us. And the paradox of that is most people are pretty much the same. Holding that paradox, and I'll bring that up at the end, is really, really important. I also found that people have skills of time, whether that's long future oriented skills, short future, in the moment focus, short past and long past. I'll give you a quick tour in a second. And then about scaling their influence. How do I influence and lead myself? How do I do better in a relationship settings? How do I function in teams or groups or families? How do I then influence in broader systems of organizations and even communities, right? So I put all this together in my dissertation and said, there's a whole lot of moving factors. And I tried to scuba dive down to 200 feet in complexity. And I mapped out about 128 different practical strategies that contribute to getting into that zone of high functioning. And I like to call it the 5 alignments. And the first alignment is the alignment of future. And that alignment of future is mission, vision, legacy, the big picture of who I want to be, backing into that future through goals, planning, time management, all those types of skills. If we have an alignment from where we are today to where we want to be at the end, we've removed the noise and interference between now and then. Now that's a perfect line. Most of us don't have perfect lines. We have glitches along the way. My whole premise is, how do we eliminate the friction and the noise on the major dimensions of our existence? I already kind of mentioned that in the moment, the internal side, When we find alignment internally, typically we've aligned to a principle that is true. Our values align to it, our thoughts align to that, our emotions follow, and our actions and deeds follow. But then we have to take into consideration the outside world, our immediate physical environment, our relational environment, the teams and groups, the organizations and community. I like to call these the social context or the layers of social context, and that all of them either help or hinder. Sometimes we grow up in cities or communities or families that are highly dysfunctional, producing a tremendous amount of noise. So what I try to help people do is to map out where the noise and the friction is that takes you off your game and helps you find alignment. And let's say you found alignment between where you are right here physically all the way through to your community, and you've removed noise. Then let's take a look at what do we do with our past, our short past. Do we measure success? Do we internalize our lessons? Do we reflect upon our experience? What do we do to cultivate our long past? How do we make the best cultivation of our successes? How do we harvest our failures? How do we continuously challenge our assumptions? And let's say we've done all those things and we're pretty well at removing all of those interferences. And now it's contributed to our focus. The fifth alignment is back to the game we're playing. Whatever your profession is, whether it's an athlete or whether it's, I love the Zen and the art of archery, like nothing between you and your target. Anyways, this is kind of my world and how I work with students and professionals about eliminating noise and interference. So with that, all that, let me get you the core of what I wanted to talk about as I have talked to Sean and understand and really say, where do we experience so much interference today? And I find it is the areas between spiritual and philosophical. Oftentimes people get really confused about what is the difference between my religion, science, God, truth, beliefs, ideals. It gets super messy. And so I like to say, how do we start rectifying the difference between philosophical ideals and spiritual? Now, so what I try to do is to say, spiritual is where truth exists. Unambiguous, clear truth. It's undeniable. It works for everybody. Everything below that line, which most of us think is spiritual, is probably more philosophical in nature. So as I look at the world's religions, it's kind of like the spectrum of colors, which is oftentimes 85% of the world believes in about 5 major religions. But if you really look at the spectrum of religious or philosophical thought, it's well over 4,000, right? So we know that we have so many belief structures. And of course, my favorite Hindu parable is the Hindu parable of the 6 blind men and the elephant, right? Each of them trying to understand the whole elephant by holding on to a piece of that elephant, and they're all experiencing a portion. And I think this is what the beauty of our philosophical and religious systems do, is they each give us angles towards pure truth. So when I saw Sean's idea of pure spirituality, let's talk about pure spirituality, but recognize that most of us aspire towards it, but probably aren't totally there quite yet. So I like to put some definitions to things. I'll share this and then I'll cut through. And Sean, let me know, I typically time myself pretty darn tight. So you let me know when I have 3 or 4 minutes to go and I'll share some final thoughts. But I usually share spiritual as knowledge based on principles, objective and irrefutable truth seeking after what actually is, despite what we might believe, a commitment towards understanding without bias, filter, or agenda, a quest towards purpose, understanding our why, a commitment towards our unique potential, and then exercising faith and hope towards service into something bigger than self. When I think about the philosophical side of us, it usually comes from our history, our belief and belief system. It's a working understanding, what some theorists would call our theories in use, and current conceptions of ourself, other people, and the world around us. It's our ideals pertaining to our structure of values, what's most important, our rules and standards that directs our thinking, our feelings, our actions, or our ethics, the virtues and qualities of excellence. And so these often mingle with one another, but I always try to distinguish between the science and God of something and our current conception of something. And I like to say it something like this. If you invite all 4,000 philosophies and religions around the world to a big table and ask them to figure out the volume of the circle in the middle, they will all have a different perspective and value system for which to identify the problem. But the only spiritual principle in the room is this right here, pi. Because you can't figure out the volume of that circle without 3.14927 all the way through the 100,000th digit. So that always got me thinking. As an athlete, I thought to myself, what is perfection? If I want to strike a tennis ball from one angle of a court to the other side, there is a perfect mathematical formula for doing so. It's just that I have to try to get my body into the physics of that moment and strike it as perfectly as I can. And I usually do it something less than perfect, but there is a perfect model to get it there every time. And this is, to me, like the iterative process of the human condition. We experiment, we notice what's right, we notice what's working, what's not working, and we seek to align ourselves towards the divine, towards excellence. In my most favorite class when I was at Georgetown was a great class called Natural Science and the Aesthetics. And my favorite book, probably one of the great books I've read, is Chaos by James Gleick, where he gives a mathematical treatise of nature and the nature of the cosmos. And I love seeing what he talks about in fractal geometry, how we see self-repeating mathematical principles showing up everywhere in nature, from snowflakes to fern leaves to repetitive mathematical formulas, the golden mean of 1.62 in the human body, from the top of the head to the feet, from finger to finger to the belly button, the beautiful ratio of 1 to 1.62, and the Greek Parthenons. And you start seeing that there is truth in the universe. And our goal as human beings is to align ourselves as best we can through that. I found it, Pat.
Bruce, you got just a couple more minutes, okay?
You got it. Okay, so in the spiritual trends, notice this. Over the last several years, and this is just 12 to 17, most people say that their religion is going down, but most other people are saying they're becoming more spiritual, but less religious. What does that mean? Oh, my formal religion isn't doing its job, but I'm seeking after things that work for me. Mindfulness, meditative practice. They're hunting for things that work, which I applaud. And so 5 considerations that I thought, and we all could speak, I know, forever on this, is that I found that a very powerful few things to be thinking about is 5 considerations. That our goal should be a dedication to seeking after what is true, despite what we believe, to have the humility to seek after what is truer than less true, and the willingness to know when an old framework or theory isn't working, to seek alignment towards that which is true, to recognizing that most truths are paradoxes. We have to see both sides of an equation. To me, this is the beauty of the yin and the yang. And the thing that I see most of us struggling with right now is our tribe is over truth versus truth over tribe. We're in a philosophical war with one another over values and beliefs and ideals, not over what is objectively true. And so lastly, my goal from a developmental perspective, besides my professional work, we have designed an online portal like Khan Academy, and we are helping to develop the competencies and skills of young leaders all over the world. And we have defined a framework of 125 skill sets, and we are training young people all over the world. This is just a sample of just some of those research-based skills that we're building. I can happily share with you information over there. And then when you put it in 3 dimensions, you start moving from the notes to the chords to the music of dance, of leadership. But at least in the leadership space, my goal is to help people understand the difference between the spiritual and the philosophical at scale. So with that, I'll throw out a few websites, and thank you for letting me plant some seeds, always very short in 15 minutes, and we will stop there. Thank you, Sean.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yes, 15 minutes is like even shorter than a TED Talk. So yes, indeed. And if you, let's see, there we go. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I know, so Todd had an emergency come up that he's going to have to leave a little bit sooner than we expected. So I'm going to dive right in and ask a question or two and try to see if we can't get Todd, if you can answer a little bit and then head out as you
Sure.
when you have to. Obviously we'll spend the next about a half an hour with the panel, and as much of that as you can say would be great. Okay.
Okay.
So this has been just beautiful and all-encompassing. I wish you guys could have been in the session of pure spirituality, because there are some beautiful connections to what we were talking about there, with the idea of I am, and diving deeper into the eternal perspective of I am. So